Okay, so these kits come with acrylic pieces and they are covered with a plastic protective sheeting. And I don't know if you've ever tried to pull the sheeting off of laser cut acrylic, but it is not easy and it will destroy your fingernails and it's just very annoying. So I'm going to show you a little trick that'll help that along, and you won't have to destroy your fingernails and have to go see your manicurist. Alright, so all you do is you take the scraper that comes with the kit and you just run it on the edge here like this. Let me get the camera right. You just go like that. And there you go. Instant fingernail savings. And then you can just grab it and pull it up like that, and there you go. Easy as can be. One of the most critical parts in these kits are these things here, these brackets. These are what hold the whole thing together. And if you don't get these really tight and they come loose, then that's going to affect the quality of your future prints. I use thread lock, blue. I got it at AutoZone. I put them on those bolts before I put the T-nuts on, and that way I can get it nice and tight and then they don't come loose again. Also, I put thread locker on this one here, and then I don't think I put thread locker on these. I don't think it's necessary, but you don't want to over tighten these or else it will actually crack this part up here, which you can see it's kind of flexing just a little bit. You can see the discoloration because this is just PLA. So if you really cinch down on these, then it'll just crack and bow, and it won't stay nice and snug. So these are the most important parts. You really want to wrench on them and make them nice and tight, but these ones here you really want to be careful with and not make overly tight. One thing you'll notice about the instructions for these kits, it tells you to use the wrong screws for this part right here. This part, it says to use 2 M5/8 and M5 T-nuts, and what you really need to use are the M410s with the M4 T-nuts. When you're putting the X-axis on the vertical post, you want to line up this Z thread and put it inside the little Z-nut assembly here. And sometimes the two nuts that are inside this assembly, they don't line up because you have a nut, a spring, and then another nut. And sometimes the threads don't align on the two nuts. So when you get the thread up in there, it'll bind up when it gets to this second nut. Now this one seems to be lined up, so it's not a big deal. But if you had one that was a big deal, you could just take an Allen wrench, or really anything, and you could use it to push down on part of this nut and just kind of work that spring, while at the same time as trying to advance this thread through it, and then that'll help with the alignment issue, and then it'll pass through. And you also want to make sure that your nut isn't binding. I've had quite a few kits, actually, probably about 5 or 6 of them, that have had I don't know if you want to call it a mismilled nut or a deformed nut in this assembly that causes it to bind up on this thread. And so I basically just bought a whole bunch of M5 nuts, and I just have them on hand so that I can replace them if needed in order to get this to travel up and down the nut. And it also, another thing that'll help is if you lubricate this thread before you run this down for the first time, and that way it spreads the lubrication all the way up and down the thread and it keeps it from binding up so bad. When you're installing things on the V-Track system, whether it's the vertical, the X, or the Y, I found it really handy to leave these bolts just the slightest bit loose so that these posts will wiggle a little bit before you put them on the track, and then install them on the track and then tighten the bolts. And that way the bolts kind of position themselves perfectly so that they're nice and snug, but they're not overly tight, and they just glide really well. So you can do that for the vertical, and you can do that for the the y-axis and the x-axis. You just have to think a little bit ahead, because when you do the x-axis according to the instructions, you're going to put the hot tip in and you won't be able to get at that bolt without kind of messing up your Bowden coupler thing here. So you want to put the plate on there first and then tighten those bolts. And the same thing with this one. I don't think the instructions has you put this on first before you put it on there, but it might. Can't remember. I kind of do my own thing. But if you look, it's not impossible, but this little nut, you can't use a nut driver or anything on this one. And also, obviously, if you put this post on here, then you can't get at the other end of that nut right there, or that bolt there. So you want to put this whole plate on as soon as you just get these 3 wheels on, and leave them a little bit loose, and then snug them on the vertical extrusion, and that way it'll be set perfectly, and you'll feel the difference. If you want to tighten it before and then put it on there, and then loosen it up and put it on there and then tighten it, you'll feel a really big difference in how smooth these things work, and you'll also see it will reduce wear on the wheels, because I've done them really tight in the past and these wheels kind of tend to shred and create like a dusty substance. But if you do it this way and tighten them on after the fact, it reduces the wear considerably. Something you want to watch out for as well, the instructions say that the fan shroud here is supposed to take M320s right here. But if you put M320s on there, they stick out pretty far, and they will actually make contact with the heating block right here. If you put this one, if you put the one in the bottom corner here, an M320. So instead, I've replaced it with an M316. Most of the kits come with extras, so you should be fine. That way when you put it on here, it won't actually touch the heating block, and it won't pull heat off into the fan shroud and cause heating problems with your printer, and potentially melting things you don't want to melt and using up a lot of energy. So check that out as well. Yeah, I don't know if you can see in there very well, but you can see how close even that M16 gets to the heating block once you put the fan shroud on. Here's another little trick for getting the maximum build volume out of these printers. It's advertised to have 130 by 150 by 100. But unfortunately, no matter what I do, I cannot get more than 125 out of the x-axis. I can get 150 and 100, but just not more than 125. So in order to get that, you need to look inside there. I have the T-nut all the way on the edge of the extrusion. Like, it can't possibly come any further out without not making contact with the extrusion. So pushing this out helps with that. I think if you look at the designs or some of the pictures, there originally were not 2 nuts. I think they added these 2 in order to make it more stable, and they sacrificed about 5 millimeters of their build volume to do that, and then just didn't change their specifications. I'm not positive, I don't really know, but you want to make sure this part is as far as it can get, so that the carriage won't crash into it until it gets to like 125. And you can check your build volume after you get the printer built. You can manually move the axis so you'd home, and then you could just manually move the axis 1 millimeter at a time until you hear the bump, and that'll tell you how far your actual build volume really is. The other thing is, similar situation down here. You want to make sure you're all the way out to the edge of your T-nuts down there, and here as well. You want to make sure that your T-nuts are all the way out on the edge, and that way you can get that extra build volume here. Now, the Y-axis build volume is mainly determined by the position of this end stop right here. I like to center it between the edge of here when the T-nuts are maxed out and the edge of this bracket. That seems to be about right. You'll see when you tell it to home, the edge of the build plate on here will, the nozzle will be right on the edge here somewhere if you have it right back here. And then when you tell it to move forward 150, it'll come all the way forward, and then you'll have about the same amount of space on the back edge as well. So this plate is considerably bigger than 150 by 130, so you don't really have to worry about going off the edges of the plate here. But still, there's just some thoughts on controlling the build volume on these and making sure you're getting the most out of your build. Another little trick is aligning this idler system. So basically what I do is I tighten it up so the T-nuts turn, and you can see on this side how the T-nuts turned right inside there. And then I just, when both T-nuts are turned and just a little bit snug, I push it all the way down so that it's kind of bent like that, and that seems to put an optimum alignment on there for the belt to travel within this groove here, down inside there, instead of emerging out. And you also want to note that this hole here is off-centered, and so you want to use the low end when you're installing it. You want to make sure it's as low as possible in order to get that belt to travel straight out and then down, and it won't drag on anything and stay inside the track. You also want to be careful not to over tighten this acrylic piece. I have had them actually crack on me in the past, and you know, that'd be a sad waste. It still works and everything, but it'd just be best if it wasn't cracked. If you do crack it to the point that it's beyond, you know, your ability to use it, you can always use just a little bit of acetone, not fingernail polish remover, like pure acetone, like what you get from a hardware store. And it will break down the acrylic, and you can put it in a vise. So you just put a little acetone in the crack and put it in a vise and hold it shut, and it will actually rebond that acrylic, and then you can salvage that piece. Okay. Another thing that isn't really clear in the instructions is how to install your belts. So, when you get to this point in installation, where you have your Y carriage free floating without the build plate, this is when I go and install the belts. And you want to stick it right between the two aluminum extrusions and just push it all the way through. It can be a little bit of a pain, especially if you're trying to do it one-handed. Let's see here. Get it to come out here. There it is. Okay, so you want it to be tooth side in like that, and then I like to push it down in the slot here, and then kind of push it down as I move the carriage back a little bit so it curls back up like that. And then I take it and I put teeth side on teeth side. And you want this to be as short as possible while still making a good amount of contact. And then you take a zip tie and you just wrap it around this part. So here you have it. I have it, the teeth are interlocked like that, and the zip tie is cinched down to hold it in place. And I like to have the actual bracket of the zip tie sticking straight up. And then you just take the clippers from your kit, and there you go. Now this belt is a lot longer than it needs to be, so if you want, you could make this a little longer and then use your clips and clip it. And I might end up doing that later, but I think it'll be fine, because you can see the angle there. It's not really gonna interfere with that pulley very much with the angles involved. So, and then we just do the same thing back here. We just pull it, make sure it is not twisted in there, which it doesn't look like it is. It looks nice and straight. So we're good there. And then you just wrap it around the pulley and you do the same thing. So once you get it snug, you can see there's a lot of extra. So you can just take the clips that come with the kit, cut that off, and then get inside there without clipping the good part of the belt, and just cut that sucker out of there. Just like that. And there you go, nice and solid. And you can see when you move it, the belt doesn't move up and down vertically. If it's too loose, it'll kind of bounce like this, either one way or the other when it's going this way or that. But this is nice and snug, so it doesn't. It just literally moves side to side. And that's exactly how you want it, because that's a big part of the accuracy, is making sure this belt is nice and tight so all the little tiny steps are translated into movement. Alright, now for the X-axis belt, you have to kind of fish it through all this stuff right here. It's a little difficult, especially with one hand, but once you get it through all this, you just want to wrap it around the pulley, but not around any of these copper studs. Let's see. So there we go. Pretty much right. Okay. And then you want to thread it down below the wheels here. And get it in there. The curvature of these belts is really annoying. Okay, got it through. On the other side, alright. So, let's see if we can get all this untangled and ready to go. Alright, so that's how you set the belt on the X axis. And then what I like to do is I take the end of this belt and I just make a little loop kind of like that, and I put a zip tie on it, and that way I can just hook it on this hook, because it's an open-ended slot. I can hook it on that hook, and then I can adjust the tension on the other side. That's what my little loop looks like, and I have the little part kind of sticking out the bottom front. That way it doesn't collide with anything. And you just push it up on there like that. It's really nice and easy. And then you just pull it tight. Make sure it's still on the pulley, which it's not. Okay, there we go. Pull it tight. And then you come down here. And the way I do this is I fold it over and I interlock the teeth. And then I take it up here and I figure out the appropriate tension by interlocking the teeth so that it'll be snug right when it goes over that post. So when I find the right combination, I'll just zip tie that and then stick it on one thing you want to make sure that you're not doing is flexing this. It's really easy to over tension this and cause this part to bend, and you'll know if you've done that if the belt is like way over on the side. So you want this to stay straight, but you want it to be snug. So make sure you're not over tensioning this. So there you have it. It's nice and straight. It's not drifting to the side. And when you move it, the belt isn't bouncing up and down. It is just going straight side to side as it's supposed to.